What do you remember about him? What were your favorite parts?
Well, Travis and I were exceptionally close. My dad's a retired colonel in the Marine Corps. So Travis and I were both born in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And we were 15 months apart. So growing up, we moved every 2 years, which is pretty normal for a military family. And I think about it now, my kids have pretty much grown up in the same, well, they've grown up in the same town their entire lives. And, I remember when we moved like a mile down the road, it was this big adjustment for them. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys have no idea. Right.
We are here today, another episode of the 38 Challenge podcast with Ryan Manion. Ryan is an author, a motivator, advocate for the military community, and president of the Travis Manion Foundation. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on today. Apologies for the technical difficulties.
No, I get it. I experience the same thing on a daily basis. So thanks for having me on.
Of course, yeah. We've been doing it in person, and you would think it's more difficult, but it's actually not. Technology's crazy. Super excited to have you on. Obviously, a lot of similarities between us and our stories. When I first started the 38 Challenge, so many people kept telling me, have you heard about the Travis Manion Foundation? I think you guys would align super well. And before we get into why that is and the story behind it, excited to say that we are partnering on an event happening that morning. So 8 a.m. at the Rocky Steps in Philadelphia, we'll be hosting a 38 Challenge in memory of my brother, and then partnering with the Travis Manion Foundation, honoring Travis and all the other people who y'all serve through TMF. Team Red, White, and Blue will be there, Irreverent Warriors, a lot of Warrior Rising, a lot of awesome partners. So Ryan, thank you for coming on. Thank you for being a partner, and super excited to see what we can accomplish together to help veterans.
Yeah, it's going to be a great event. Anything at the Art Museum at the Rocky Steps is always a fun, challenging event. So I think you picked the right location for an event before Army Navy, for sure.
Yeah, I think we nailed the location. I think it'll be interesting to see how many people are hungover that morning. But but the beautiful thing about suffering, right, and our message is that it's supposed to be hard and it's supposed to be uncomfortable. So I say people should be hungover for it, and that they should voluntarily add more suffering to that experience.
Yeah, no better cure for a hangover, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we'll do the 38 Challenge that morning, and then we'll get everyone out of there by 9:15, 9:30, and then people can boogie over to the stadium for the Travis Manion Foundation's tailgate, y'all's renowned tailgate.
Yeah, that's again gonna be you challenge yourself in the morning, and then drink a few beers to celebrate afterwards. So
absolutely, and we'll be celebrating a Navy win.
That's right.
Okay, so now that I got that shameless plug out of the way, let's get into the nitty gritty, right, of our stories. So why don't you talk about the origin and the history of the Travis Manion Foundation, and then what y'all are doing now for the veteran community?
Sure. So the Travis Manion Foundation was really created after my brother, First Lieutenant Travis Manion, was killed in Iraq. He was killed on his second tour of duty. Like your brother, graduate of the Naval Academy. Travis was class of 2004, deployed for his first deployment to Iraq in 2005, and then was on his second deployment. He was part of a MIT team, a military transition team, helping to train the Iraqi army when he was killed by enemy sniper. And, after Travis died, it was in 2007. And you think about, where we are right now in terms of technology and social media platforms. I remember talking to Travis in Iraq and actually asking him if I could set him up a MySpace account. Like MySpace, Facebook only existed really on college campuses at the time. MySpace was a social media platform. And I remember saying like, Trav, let me set you up with a MySpace account. And he was like, hell no, I do not want a MySpace account. He wanted nothing to do with it.
Right.
But my point to telling you that is like when Travis was killed, there was no GoFundMe, there was no platforms to, raise money or advocacy or any of that. It was actually my parents' friends asked us if they could help to create a memorial fund for Travis. And in kind of the depths of our grief and shock, we said, sure, not really realizing what that meant. But, they went to a local bank in our town and set up the first Lieutenant Travis Manion Memorial Fund. And the only way donations came in there was by people literally mailing checks into the bank. So, it showed up in his obituary, and a few weeks after Travis's death, when we were kind of sitting down and understanding what had happened, and kind of, they said, well, we set up this memorial fund at the bank and there's a significant amount of funds in it. And we had several $100,000. And wow. I think about that now, because the idea that like people actually took their checkbooks out and wrote checks and mailed them in, and it's pretty amazing. And so at that point, we had to decide, okay, well, what is the Travis Manion Memorial Fund, right? My brother was not married. He had no dependents. And, we were certainly as a family not looking for any money. And so we started by doing what a lot of family memorial funds do. We started a scholarship at Travis's high school. He went to an all-boys high school outside of Philadelphia, LaSalle College High School, that was really instrumental in, him becoming who he was. And then we started some things down at the Naval Academy with the wrestling team. Travis was a Navy wrestler. And then from there, I always say my dad and I really saw the Travis Manion Foundation as it became, within the year. My mom put in 501c3 paperwork, but we really saw it as a way for my mom to channel the loss of her son. It was like, this is mom's outlet. Travis was her only son, and this is a way for her to channel her grief. And what we didn't realize is that my mom had much bigger plans in mind. And one of the things my mom always hearkened back to was that when Travis was killed, we as a family received so much incredible support from the military community and just in general. And so we really felt like we had been embraced and we felt super supported. But that's not the reality for everyone. And so one of the first things my mom said is like, she didn't want any other family to feel like they did not have that same support that we felt as a family. And from there, she started to really identify the gaps that were missing within our veteran service community. And that's where the Travis Manion Foundation was born. That's where we continue to grow. And, I get asked the question a lot. And, here we are today, 15 years later. My mom has since passed from cancer, but she really was the driving force of the foundation for a long time. And, people ask me all the time, well, what was it? Like, how did you go from this small memorial fund to now one of the nation's leading veteran service organizations? And I always wish that I had like some very articulate answer about our strategic planning and how we, really were.
I wish you had that. I wish you had that too, so I could take some pointers.
Yeah. The fact of the matter is, the truth is like, we didn't really know what we were doing at first, but I felt like we had a mission and we had almost an ethos that people really attached to. And really, it was the 5 words that my brother spoke before he left: if not me, then who? And so that's what Travis was asked before he left to go on his second tour of duty. And then those were the 5 words that my family and I said, like, we need to take these 5 words and we need to make sure that we apply them to everything we're doing going forward. And I think people really attached to that idea of how they could take that motto and apply it into their lives. So I like to say we were the ultimate grassroots project. And really everything that we do today started out as us, really building, measuring, learning, and repeating. And that's one of the values that we have at the Travis Manion Foundation. But we tried different things. We saw what worked. We failed a lot of times. And and here we are today. And, I feel privileged every day that I get to lead this organization, that my mom started, that's named after my brother. But I also feel obviously a tremendous responsibility in that too, to make sure that we are doing the most impactful work that we can possibly do for our military community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very encouraging to hear that you guys know what you're doing, because I have no idea what I'm doing. But I think there's a lot of similarities, right? Like this is the way. I think it's developed a little bit beyond that, but at first, like when I first created the 38 challenge workout, which is what we started as, it was just a way for me to grieve my brother, right? And I was like, let's all go to, because Matt was, I think, very similar to Travis in the fact that loved exercise, right? Loved doing hard things, right? Matt was also a wrestler, all-state wrestler, and then played football at the academy. So I'm sure we'll get into similarities, and interested to hear stories about Travis. But yeah, it's encouraging to hear, because as we're navigating through these different seasons of grief, right? I feel like for me at first it was like go, right? This is like what we're doing, and then now it's in this like second wave of like shit, like one, you have this responsibility to help others now, and to like try to reduce veteran suicide, which is not an easy task. And then also it's like your brother's gone, right? And that's something that you're always going to have to deal with. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your brother, Travis? What do you remember about him? What were your favorite parts?
Well, Travis and I were exceptionally close. My dad's a retired colonel in the Marine Corps. So Travis and I were both born in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And we were 15 months apart. So growing up, we moved every 2 years, which is pretty normal for a military family. And I think about it now, my kids have pretty much grown up in the same, well, they've grown up in the same town their entire lives. And, I remember when we moved like a mile down the road, it was this big adjustment for them. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys have no idea. Right. But it taught us a lot, both of us, about adversity, overcoming different things. And I didn't realize it at the time. I just was like sad every time we had to move, because I had to start all over again. But I always had Travis with me. I think it would have been a lot harder if I had siblings that were in different ages. I mean, there were times where, when we moved across the country from California to Virginia, Travis and I ended up being in the same grade, because Travis was held back because he was on the younger side, or I was held back because I was on the younger side, and we ended up in the same grade. And then I went into regardless, we were very tight. And right. So, that was something that for me continued on. When my dad left active duty, we ended up outside of Philadelphia, and, I watched how other people interacted with their siblings. And I was, with me, it was like, oh, well, I'm going here. And I'm like, well, my brother's coming. And it's like, oh, your brother's coming. Well, yeah, my brother's coming. Like, it was just very natural for me to be like, well, whatever I did, Travis did with me. Now, don't get me wrong. We got in some drag out fights. We were siblings. That's what happens. But he was always that person for me. He was always that person that I could turn to like level set. And I always say, like, Travis was academically gifted. He was athletically gifted. And I was very happy to be in his shadow. I was not one that was jealous or envious of his accomplishments, because on the flip side, I was not very concerned about my academic or athletic achievements. I was more concerned about, what I was doing socially that Friday night. And so I was very happy to take a backseat to let Travis shine. But Travis very much leaned on me for like advice on social interactions, especially with girls. Right. And
yeah,
I will say one of the things about Travis is that he was super humble. And I don't think he ever really understood or appreciated just his greatness, I will say. He was an All-American wrestler, all state in lacrosse. And I remember it was my junior prom, and I had a big group of friends, and one of my girlfriends didn't get asked to go to prom. And she was a little heavy set. She was, kind of, I don't know the best way to say it, but like she was the girl that wasn't asked, right? And
Right.
nobody was looking to take her. And we had asked a couple of our friends, hey, just take her. No, no, no. And um, I remember going to my brother and I'm like, hey, listen, so and so doesn't have a date to prom. Like, would you like take one for the team and take her? And he was like, absolutely. She's so much fun. I'd love to go. And he came home from a wrestling match, ran upstairs. We had gotten him a tux, and my brother was a really good looking guy, really super fit.
Yeah,
And so
stud.
like, yeah, it's like she walked in with like the stud to the prom. And I don't know. It's just things like that for him were just so like, he was never worried about what people thought of him. He never, was worried about, whether he was part of the popular crowd or whether he was just that person that everybody loved. And he really was. And I say this a lot. I talked to a lot. I was just talking to someone that served with him in Iraq that had connected with me on LinkedIn, and he was telling me stories about Travis. They would come back from like a 12-hour deployment or a 12-hour mission. And he said, and all of us couldn't wait to just fall into our bed. And he said, and your brother would go and hit the gym. And we were like, this guy is crazy. Like, he doesn't stop. And, that's how Travis was when he was like 15 years old. So it didn't surprise me at all. But he was like, your brother was the greatest guy, just like super humble, super funny, super friendly. And, I think a lot of times when people pass, you kind of build them up on this pedestal and you remember all the good and you take away all the bad. And, with Travis, like there wasn't really any bad to take away. Like the stories that you hear about him, like they're not embellished. It's just who he was.
Yeah, absolutely. I have chills right now, and because a lot of times on this podcast, like we ask people, what are their darkest moments, but I don't really get to talk about or brag on my brother that much, and I think it's interesting the different dynamics. So Matt was 9 years older than me, right? So he was a lot older than I was, so he pretty much raised me, right? So I would say we were equally as close, but it was a different relationship. I remember a story my sister told me. I think my sister was at prom with her boyfriend, and then my brother like went up, and then when they were at prom and dancing, he was like, "Hey, make room for Jesus." And like this guy was like terrified of Matt because he's 18 years old and like 240 pounds, right? The linebacker and all that stuff. So it was a little dynamic, or it was a different dynamic. But I got Matt's dog tags tattooed on my back, attached to a crown of thorns next to a cross when he was alive, right? That's how close that we were. Matt also was an all-state wrestler, right? He tied the record for forced fumbles in a season at Navy, right? It was just again like great-looking cat. Everyone loved him. Everyone respected him. He was very quiet, but I get those messages now too. Just the other day, I actually went on Facebook. And I don't really go on Facebook that much. I just never really have. Two things happened. One, the first thing I saw in my inbox was just a bunch of missed calls from Matt. Now, it's not because I missed them. We talked through WhatsApp, but like seeing that was like, whoa,
Yeah.
that was tough. But then the next message I saw was someone reaching out to me and say, hey, is this the brother of Captain Matthew Brewer? And I said, yes, it is. And he reached out and just said, I was under your brother in the Marine Corps, and I just want to let you know that he was the epitome of a Marine. I would have literally died for him because I know he would have died for us. So seeing how our brothers impact people, right, and seeing the change that they make in other people's lives when they're gone, that's why we do it. And there was a video. I don't remember if I sent it to you or not, but so the Marine Corps on a naval ship, they did the 38 challenge together, and during that workout, there's a part of the video actually at the end where they're taking a picture, and right next to each other, someone's wearing this shirt, a 38 challenge shirt, and then the other person's wearing a Travis Manion Foundation shirt as they were working out on that ship, on a naval ship. I'll send it to you.
That's awesome.
But I was just looking at that, I was like, this is crazy, right? Like Matt and Travis are like literally sitting right there next to each other, like making an impact in their different ways. So it's crazy. What do you remember from the day that Travis passed?
I remember, I remember a lot of it. I was at my parents' house. I lived in New Jersey at the time, and my mom had asked us to come up. It was in April. It was a Sunday. It was a really nice day, and she said, I'm gonna have a barbecue, um, and invite the family. And so we had about 30 people at our house at the time. And I had run out into I had run out into town, left my 10-month-old daughter at the house. It was I had run into town to do something, and my phone kept ringing, and I was in the middle of a conversation with someone, and I saw it was my mom calling, and she called, and I ignored the call because I was in the middle of a conversation, and then she called again, and then she called again, and I was like, my 10-month-old child's at the house. Let me see what's going on. And I picked up the phone, and I just heard screaming on the other end of the line. I thought it was my mom at the time, but it turned out to be my mom's sister. And nothing they were saying was like made any sense. It was just like inaudible screaming. And right away, I thought something had happened to my daughter. And I was like, what happened? What happened? Is Maggie okay? I kept saying, is Maggie okay? And they were like, you have to come home. And so I said, did you call an ambulance? And they said, yes. And so I was shaking so much I couldn't even drive. And I had the person with me. I was less than a mile from my house, but I'm like, something happened to my daughter. And they were like, get in the car. They raced me home. And all I was thinking in my head was, she fell and hit her head. She choked. I'm a brand new mother. And we pulled up into our driveway, and my dad was standing in the driveway along with his friend, who was a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps. And the two of them were just standing in the driveway. And it still didn't dawn on me, even though I was like, why is Lieutenant Colonel Gardner in the driveway? I got out of the car and I just said, where's the ambulance? And my dad was standing at the bottom of the driveway, and he just like looked at me and he said, Travis is dead. And I just collapsed at the top of the driveway, because it was this like shift where I had thought that something had happened to my daughter, and I never even was thinking that it was about Travis. And I physically could not stand up, and I just remember screaming, it's not fair, it's not fair. And all of our neighbors were walking out of the house because they saw kind of the commotion happening in our driveway. I remember my neighbor, he was a retired Navy captain, came and physically like picked me up and walked me to the door. And my dad didn't say anything. He was just silent, standing in the driveway and just staring up at the sky. And I kind of just walked by him. And it was pretty chaotic at my house. It was all my cousins. It was my aunts, my uncle, my grandmother. All these people learning this news together. And so everybody was just in shock. I remember when I walked in my house, I looked to the side, and my little cousins who we had grown up with, it was my dad's brother's kids. They were standing on the side of the house, hysterically crying, and my aunt was consoling them. And then I walked into the house, and my grandmother, who was like 90 years old, was sitting in her wheelchair, and she was just crying, and nobody was comforting her because everybody else was just in a state of shock as well. And so, that's kind of my recollection from like that day. I think we started drinking a lot of whiskey to dull the pain after that. But I remember walking through my parents' door, and the thought I had as I walked through the door was just like, oh my God, like everything has changed. Like when I took that step into that door, it was our world has changed. And I remember feeling like, oh my God, like everything is changed.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in Arizona with my buddies on a golf trip, and my mom was in Hawaii. God bless her soul. So she had a 10-hour flight back on the plane from Hawaii, and I was in Arizona. Yeah, I will never forget that phone call. Right, it was like a text. It was like, something's wrong. It's like my mom's like, hey, can you talk right now? And I answered the phone, and yeah, after that phone call, it's the rest of your life is. I had the same exact thoughts. It was like, what, like this can't be real. I literally, couldn't move, just collapsed to the floor and bawling my eyes out. And I think that those, I guess for you, what did grief look like after losing Travis? / still does. I'm sure it's a never ending journey.
Yeah. In the immediate aftermath, it was debilitating. I had been married for a year, a year and a half, had a 10-month-old child. I could not care for my child. My husband, well, actually my daughter went for 48 hours to a friend's house because it was just so chaotic in the house. My husband got her out of there. But I remember not even being able to change her diaper. There was something, I look back now and I think like what made my mom decide to have a barbecue that day. Like that, we're definitely like, my parents hosted a lot. They were always like very social, but like that day to just say, everybody come over this, I felt like there was some divine intervention that we were all together, that I wasn't in New Jersey having to make that 2.5-hour drive to my parents' house. And, for the first couple of days, I slept with my parents, in between my parents, like I was a 5-year-old child myself. I felt like I could not leave their side, even though I was a grown woman married with my own child. And I remember for probably about a month, maybe 2, every morning I would wake up. And as soon as I opened my eyes, I would just bawl hysterically, because it was like it wasn't like waking up from a nightmare. It was waking up into a nightmare, because as soon as I was awake, it was like, oh my God, this is real. And I thought at that time it was never going to stop. As you know, it does, right? But yeah, the beginning was really tough. It was for me, he was my person. And had anything like this ever happen, like it was like Travis is who I would go to. So it was like, oh my God, he's gone. Like I can't talk to Travis about Travis's death because Travis died, right? And so it was this weird dynamic of like, I was 27 years old and the person that I had relied on for everything in my entire life, was not there. The person that knew my every deepest, darkest secret about me, was gone. And that was really tough. It's still tough, even today. There's still times where I'm like, I need to talk to you about this, Travis. Like you would be the one to help me figure out how to work through this. So, but grief, I think grief changes you. But grief itself also changes. I can stand up in front of 5,000 people and tell the story of losing my brother and keep a straight face. But, I think it was like a few weeks ago, I was running on the treadmill and a song came on and I just lost it and I broke down and I was like, oh my God, I miss my brother so much. So, it's a little bit scarier as you move out from your grief, because as you move out from your loss, because I feel like those moments like kind of come out of nowhere, where before it's just like kind of always, all of a sudden it just hits you at these like random times. I don't know if you experience that too,
Yeah.
but you just kind of get hit with it and you're like, and sometimes it's like one thing if you're on your treadmill, but there's been times where I'm like, oh shit, not now, So
Yeah, whenever I'm not sure how much of like depression, because I know grief can look like depression and anxiety, right? So whenever I start to feel that, and I'm back in St. Louis, whenever I start to feel like that overwhelm, I just go to Matt's grave, because that's where I get everything out, right? So I think like that's been helpful for me to like voluntarily like be like, okay, I know I'm gonna go, and like I know I'm gonna lose it because it happens every time. But yeah, there'll still be like when I mentioned that Facebook thing the other day, like I just lost it. I was like, how could I have missed these calls, right? Like, and we'll at a different date, we can go further into that, because I did miss a call from my brother. Would have been the last call I ever took from him. So, but it comes and it goes, and then it's also the reason for me getting up in the morning, right? It's the reason that I'm so passionate and have this purpose, right? So it's like it's this super weird dynamic that not many people understand, but that I know that you do.
Yeah.
Would you say that, because you've been through like a lot of amazing people and leaders, you've been through a lot in your life, would you say that has been your greatest struggle or your darkest moment, or has there been other times in your life where?
I think for me, I lost my brother in 2007, and then 4 days before the 5th anniversary of Travis's death, my mom died of cancer. And, I watched my mom for 8 months fight. And the loss was different because, with Travis, it was sudden, it was tragic, it was unexpected. When my mom was diagnosed with cancer, that was certainly unexpected too. But I had 8 months, and, I often like kind of compare the two, like which was worse, like watching someone die over an amount of time or losing them suddenly. And they both have their different challenges. But it was after the loss of my mom that I really went into a bad place. I suffered with debilitating anxiety. And I couldn't help but focus on the fact that like my nuclear family went from 2 to 4 in less than 5 years. And it was just this like, oh my gosh, it's just me and my dad. Like my mom and my brother are both gone. And my mom was 56 years old when she died. So she was young. It was not, and so it was just this like out of nowhere, she's just diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And it's like, this can't be real. And I started, and I've talked about it, I was not a proponent of therapy before this. My dad has come a long way, but my dad's way of overcoming anything, whether it was mental or physical, was like, go for a run. Like if it was like, I'm not, one of the first things we did after Travis was killed was we ran the marathon. It was like, all right, Travis died, we're going to run a marathon, So I totally relate. The 38 challenge, it's like, you got to just push yourself. And I 100% believe that your physical well-being is directly related to your mental well-being, but sometimes it's not enough. And so for me, I got to a place where like there was no amount of running that was going to take me out of where I was. I literally could not get in my car and drive more than 5 miles from my house. Like it was that bad. I woke up every day just crippled by anxiety. And, I had some really, really bad thoughts. And it wasn't that I didn't want to live, but I didn't want to live like that. Right. And so every day I would wake up hoping it would be the day that I didn't feel like that. And that day was not coming. And so it was actually one of my best friends, Amy Looney, whose husband was killed 3 years after Travis, they were best friends and roommates at the Naval Academy. And Amy, when Brendan was killed in Afghanistan, Amy was in therapy like the next day. And she would always talk to me about her therapy sessions. And I was like, okay, well, that's not for me, you know? And so she finally said, Ryan, you have to get help. Like, you have to get help. And so I remember breaking down to my husband and my dad and saying, I'm not okay. And I started seeing a therapist, and it's probably 2 months after I had been going there once a week. And, you know, like, they would give me different breathing exercises, and I would feel like good in the moment, right? Like, I would feel good when I was there because I felt this release of being able to talk about how I was feeling, but it wasn't like it was this magic cure, right? And so it was about 2 months after I'd been going to therapy, the therapist was like, okay, you know, I just want to let you know that, you know, we've been seeing each other for a while now. Like, you definitely have PTS. And I was like, what? Like, no, I don't. And I was super offended. And I came home that night and I called Amy and I'm like, this is such bullshit. Like,
Right.
this woman just told me I have PTS. And I was like, I do not. And, you know, in my mind, PTS was something that, like, you know, our brothers come home with PTS because they're
Exactly.
in
Yeah.
war zones.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't feel worthy of being diagnosed with PTS. Like, why would I be like, I'm just the bystander dealing with everything that they're going through. Why would I be diagnosed with PTS? And I called Amy up and I was like, this is ridiculous. And she's like, Ryan, I was diagnosed with PTS like a week after Brendan died. Like, yeah, you clearly have it, you know,
Yeah.
and you've gone through some like significant tragedies in
Shit,
a
I
very
got
short
PTS. I
time.
didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
I gotta go get that diagnosed.
Yeah. And so it was like, it angered me, but it also at the same time, once I kind of processed it, I was like, okay, so all right, what do I have to do to get better? And so, you know, again, I think for anybody that's dealing with mental health challenges, it's like, you have to put in the work, right? Like, you can't just say, I'm going to go to therapy once a week and I'm going to get better. Like, that's not how it happens. Like, yeah, that's one part of it. You also, I believe, again, you have to be physically active, and that has to be another component of it. Some people need medication. Like, some people, you know, have to get over that hump. That wasn't something that I wanted to turn to, and I didn't, and I was able to kind of get out of it without having to go down that road. But I think, like, everybody's mental health challenge and road looks different, and you have to be accepting of, like, the different places that you have to go in order to help yourself. But if you're not willing to help yourself, you're not going to be helped. Like, it's that's just what it is, you
Yeah.
know?
There's a 100 things that I want to touch on that you just said. I think the first is the exercise portion, because especially like with the community that we serve, I feel like, and myself too, like, I feel like we just try to like work out hard enough where it's like, okay, like I'm just gonna work this out. I'm gonna get my endorphins super high. And it's like, okay, like, whew. But it's like, no, like, that's not how it works. So the purpose of the 38 challenge, right, is to voluntarily place yourself in an uncomfortable situation, to lean on and to suffer with other people in your community, people that you love, people that you trust, because that's what we have to do to challenge the stigma associated with seeking help, right? And so you voluntarily are saying, I'm going to go do this hard thing. It's a lot, as you just mentioned, like, it's a lot harder saying, like, I need to go to therapy than it is to go for a run. A lot harder, way, not even comparison, right? And so also the community that we serve and how we're trying to change the way that it's framed is like, listen, like, Travis, Matt, like, these are hard dudes. Right? They do hard things. It's what warriors do. So if that's what a warrior does, and his role is to protect, right, and his role is to kill and to serve, well, then that means you should be doing the hard thing of seeking help, right? There's nothing that's harder. So if you consider yourself a hard dude, or you consider yourself a warrior, then you should take the route which is more difficult, aka being vulnerable and seeking help. How would you define vulnerability? Because I think you are clearly embrace vulnerability.
You know, you say that, but the reality is that I don't know how much I embrace it. I'm super uncomfortable with being vulnerable.
Mm.
Um, it took me a long time to publicly share that I had dealt with the things I dealt with, the anxiety and depression that I dealt with. It took me a long time to actually be open about that. I mean, I remember talking to the night that I told my dad and my husband how bad I was. It was really, really hard. It was probably one of the hardest things that I have ever done. And then to go out and share with others in a public setting that like I actually have dealt with my own mental health challenges. That was super uncomfortable for me. It's still uncomfortable for me. But I also recognize the extreme importance of it because, you know, it's very easy to put on this facade. Like, you know, people can watch you and they see you out there and you're promoting your 38 challenge and you've got this awesome podcast and you have on these incredible guests. And, you know, I kind of see myself, or I see you and me, yeah. Right? Like I did the same thing. It was like, I just want to get out there and honor my brother and be out there and show how strong I am. And then I would have people like say like, wow, you're so strong. How do you do it? And it was like, no. Time out. I'm actually not as strong as you think I am.
Yes.
I want to create this facade that like, you know, other people were dealing with things that they couldn't even relate to me because I certainly didn't appear like I was dealing with them. And so I felt like I had a responsibility to be like, no, you know what? Like I'm dealing with some shit too. But I feel like where I am now, I'm able to say like, hey, I made it to the other side, right? But I still have days, you know, I still have moments. And what I have found is like, for me, I'm this creature of habit. I'm out a lot. I travel a lot. I go a lot of different places. I love nothing more than being in my home with my kids. And just, you know, you're not finding me out on, if I have a Saturday night where I don't have anything to do, I'm not actively looking for something to do. I'm sitting at home and by the fireplace with the TV on, drinking a cup of tea. Like that's my comfort zone. And so it can become very easy to just rest in that comfort zone. And what I found for me is the longer I rest in that comfort zone, the easier it is for me to experience anxiety when I have to go out and do things that are outside of that comfort zone. So I constantly push myself to do things that are outside of my comfort zone on a daily basis. Like if something seems challenging, I want to try it because I almost feel like every time I do something outside of my comfort zone, it builds me up as, you know, a person that is stronger and more resilient, honestly.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And so I want to touch on, because one of our values is comfort in the uncomfortable, right? Because like, and going to your point, like when I talk about like my mental health publicly and people are like, man, I'm so sorry, like you're going through this. Like, I know I don't want that. Like, I don't want you to be like, that makes me like way more uncomfortable. Like, I just want you to understand that like what you're going through, I'm going through it too. And so yesterday on Instagram, like posted something on my story and was just like fuck it, I'm just gonna talk about what I'm going through, right? And the amount of people that responded were like you don't, like I have the exact same feelings. And I'm like, okay, well, there's a lot more people that are going through this than I probably thought. And like we're all in this together, and grief and anxiety and depression, like it's all just a feeling that's gonna pass. Just like happiness is gonna pass, like you said, like just like comfort is gonna pass, just like discomfort is gonna pass. For you, what did that anxiety and depression look like and feel like? Because I think it's important for people to understand that like their unique circumstances are actually not that unique.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that my depression manifested in anxiety that was, you know, and I don't know if anybody's, you know, out there has dealt with like anxiety in you know, you have these like episodes, like I've had like panic attacks. Like I had panic attacks before my brother was killed. I'm just naturally an anxious person. And so
Me too. I had a panic attack last night.
Yeah. I mean, like most of my panic attacks occurred like after a night of drinking in college the next day, you know, and I would be, you know, maybe don't drink so much next time. Right. But like I could recognize when I was having them and why I was having them. But when after my mom died, I had anxiety where I woke up every day and like everything was scary for me. And it was actually brought on by, it was Christmas night. And the last time my brother left for Iraq the day after Christmas in 2006. So Christmas was always kind of this like, you know, after he was killed, it was always, it was like, it was, it was a sad time.
It's sad.
You know?
It's sad.
It was sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the Christmas after Travis was killed, my mom went all out, like just hosted. We always hosted a Christmas party at our house, and my dad's one of 10. I've got 30 something first cousins, and so we'd have 100 people in our house. And my mom was like, we're hosting this Christmas party, like we're bringing everybody together. And so the year after my mom died, I was like, well, I'm having the Christmas party. I'm going to host it. And it went off flawlessly, like over 100 people in the house. And I felt like, okay, I did it. I accomplished my mom's vision that she had for all those years. And it was that night I was lying in bed. And I feel like it was like this adrenaline, everything left my body. And I thought I was dying. I literally had the panic attack of all mother panic attacks.
They're
and I
the
was
worst.
Yeah. And I literally was like, I'm trying to wake up my husband. I'm like, you have to take me to the hospital. And I talk about this in my book because my husband is like, probably, now some people may not think so, but for me, he's the best person to have around when I'm having a panic attack because he's so laid back. He's like, stop, go to bed, you're fine. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I'm like, he doesn't feed into my anxiety where like, I feel like, you know, if I said, oh my God, I'm having an anxiety attack and somebody was like, okay, I'm going to get you to the hospital, it would make me panic more. Right.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'd be like, oh my God, I am dying. Yeah.
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 He's like, chill out. He's like, I'm like, I can't breathe. He's like, well, you're talking to me, so you're breathing, you know? And so, you know, people say like, oh, he's not comforting you. No, like that's what I need. But when I woke up the next day, I had this just kind of like anxiety that was just, it wasn't a panic attack, but it was anxiety that just wouldn't leave. And it was just all day long. And I would go on a run and I would be anxious the entire time I was running. And I'd never felt that before. And so I got into this place where I was like, oh my God, this is my life now. Like, this is who I am now. I'm just never not going to feel like this. And it ate away at me because it was days and then weeks and then months where every day. And it started to chip away at, you know, everything I was doing on a daily basis. I would
Literally
go
everything.
Yeah. Like I would go into the office and I would at TMF and I would sit in the driveway. I would sit in our parking lot and I would be like, I can't go in. I can't go in. And sometimes I would go in and I'd fake it and just feel super uncomfortable the whole time. And sometimes I would just turn around and drive home. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I was the person who was supposed to be the spokesperson for our organization. And I'm like, I'm not going to be able to do this, you know? And I didn't tell anybody. I didn't even tell my husband at first because, or my dad, I didn't share it with anybody. I just tried to maintain. And then, you know, again, it was one day I was sitting in the shower and I'd woken up to another day of just feeling this feeling. And I was like, if this is what life is going to be like I want out. Like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And when I had that thought, it was the scariest thought in the world.
Terrifying thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought, oh my God, I get it. Like, I get why people get to this place that they feel no way out. And I felt that. And yeah, and that's when I decided that I had to be vulnerable in order to help myself. And, you know, I thought that by sharing it with my dad, I thought he was going to kind of downplay what I was going through. But I remember it was at dinner that night and I said something to my husband and my dad and I'm like, I'm not okay. And, you know, again, I think back to other times where I was like, I'm not feeling good. My dad would be like, go for a run. And I just wasn't going to be able to handle that reaction from him. But I think he knew something was different. And he was like, okay, we're going to figure this out. So
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you are so open to talk about that. Like, Ryan, I'll be honest, like, that's honestly, like, and again, like, please don't feel bad for me, because like that's like actually the last thing I want. Like, it pisses me off when people are like, oh, I wish I could give you a hug. I'm like, oh my God, like, give me a break. Like, you know what I'm saying? But like, that's where like I'm at like now. So I hope, like, we'll see how bad it is. I'm gonna get an MRI in my knee tomorrow, and like me, like, that's like work out twice a day. Like, that's how a lot of my mental health is, like, which I'm now understanding, like, hey, like, maybe that's not the best way to deal with your mental health. But this isn't the first time I've felt this way, right? And like, it like you said, like, it literally, from eating food to waking up in the morning to going to work out to every thought that you have, like, it literally takes over every single part of your life.
yeah.
And so, like, because of the nature of what I do, right, I'm trying to like learn all this stuff about, like, I bought all these books on mental health, and it's like, thank God I have them. But what I'm realizing, like, understanding is like, yeah, I'm anxious now, and like, I'm depressed now. Like, I'll completely admit that. But it will pass, right? Just like yours passed, right? And I know that now, I know how to equip myself with ways to get through this tough part of life, right? So yesterday morning, I was like, you are getting out of bed, and like, you are going to work out, right?
Yeah.
And then after that, I was like, it was like 40 degrees in the morning. We've got a pool in our apartment, and I was like, you're gonna go jump in the pool, right? Because you need to feel something, dude. Like, you need to feel something. Jumped in the pool, and like, the day was a lot better last night, and like, the day went a lot better last night. Like, panic attack this morning, like, the anxiety was there, but like, I know that I'm going to get through it, right? And I know like what it feels like to make those hard, uncomfortable decisions, right? It's like, I'm going to get through this. And I think that that's what people need to understand, is like, I'm going through it. I will pass it. You've been through it. You passed it. And I think that that's what I love of your message, is that, everyone, I forget exactly what the quote is, but like, everyone will struggle in this life. You tell me the quote. You know what it is.
Everyone's going to struggle in this life, but you got to learn to struggle well.
Yeah. So what does struggling well look like for you?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of what you're talking about. You got to put in the work, right? Like, I could have very easily pulled the covers up over my head. But I make the conscious decision every day not to. And, you say, hey, I'm going through this, but I know I'm going to come out on the other side. And you will, because you are equipping yourself with the tools to do that. But if you don't do that, like, no, you're not going to come out on the other side, right? Like, you can be in this perpetual state of depression and anxiety your entire life if you don't put in the work.
Yep.
If you don't put in the work to make yourself better. So it all, unfortunately, it all rests on you, right? Are you going to make the decisions every day to understand? And I always say, like, life is ebbs and flows. Like, I'm in a good place mentally right now. It may not look the same for me 6 months from now, but
Right.
I know I'm going to have the tools to work through that period in my life. And for me, it's a combination of eating well, staying physically active, and, maybe some therapy here and there. Like, that's what works for me. You have to figure out the recipe for you, because everybody's recipe is different. And so, each and every one of us, like, we were talking today, and we've got a big week coming up with a lot of different things with our organization, and everybody was talking about just like, oh my gosh, I'm so anxious about this, I'm so anxious about that, and somebody said, well, I'm not anxious yet, so I feel like I'm the odd man out. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, if you're not anxious by this time next week, then you're missing something, because
Yeah.
but the point is that, like, all of us are going to struggle. Like, you and I have been dealt some pretty devastating knocks, right? I mean, we lost our brothers, like, and in untimely, tragic deaths. Not everybody is going to have the same type of loss that we had, but I'm not going to disvalue somebody's situation. They could feel the same way we're feeling without having the loss that we had, right? And
Exactly.
so every single one of us is going to struggle in this life. It's just a matter of when. And so I always say, like, for me, I don't look at it as like, oh, okay, I lost my brother, I lost my mom, I'm good. Like, what else could happen to me? What else could go wrong? Like, shit's going to go wrong. Like, shit's going to happen. That's life. Right. And so you have to be prepared for those knocks when they come. And if you haven't had a knock yet, like,
It's coming.
yeah, it's coming. And, unfortunately, it's coming. And so, like, prepare yourself now for how you're going to be when it comes. Because for me, I was fully unprepared. In fact, I often talk about, like, when Travis was in Iraq, I was not even scared about him being in Iraq either time. Even though I knew the second time, he was not on a base. He was with a military transition team. He was training the Iraqi army. Like, I knew it was a much dangerous role that he was in his second deployment. But I operated in this like needle in a haystack theory. I was like, okay, there's this many troops in Iraq. There's this many that have been killed. Like, the percentage of my brother being one of those is very low. So I just like, I don't know if that was like my coping mechanism at the time, but it was a terrible coping mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, my mom, like, every day, like, was worried about his safety. She was constantly worried about his safety. And, I was just like, it's going to be fine. He's, when she would be like, oh my gosh, Travis, I'm like, stop, he's fine. He's fine. Like, that's how I would be. I literally had no reservations or fear of anything happening to him, because I mean, he was like superhuman to me. I'm like, well, it's not going to be Travis. I mean, come on, not Travis. So I think that's why it was so shocking to me when it was Travis,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, a couple of things that you pointed out. Like, one, like, your brother doesn't need to be killed in action, or he doesn't need to kill himself for you to experience depression and anxiety. And so I would hate for anyone to listening to this be like, well, I haven't gone through that. Like, why am I like, no, like, depression, anxiety, like, it does not, it always has a reason. I think, like, when someone, like, I used to think like, oh, it doesn't have a face, but like, it does. Like, there's something that you are avoiding. There's something that you can fix in your life that will combat depression, anxiety. That's just like the science behind it. Like, there literally is. But it doesn't need to be some super traumatic experience, right? And so I think that, and for both of our organizations, like, the warrior culture is just the tip of the spear, but that's where everyone looks to, right? They look at Jocko, right? And they look at these guys and that's who people look up to, right? As they should, right? They're great men, but like, those guys have gone through the same thing, right? And it's like, people need to understand that this community needs to change as well, just like everyone in this world does in society. Like, we need to have these open conversations, and I'm so very glad that we are. And yeah, I think that, one of the only ways to get through it is, like, you have to consciously make uncomfortable decisions. Like, that's literally what it boils down to. And then reward yourself for doing so. It's like, okay, I got up today. Like your example, right? I showed up, I went to the office, I got everything done that I needed to. Like, that's a win, right? Like, I made the conscious decision to get out of bed. So if you could give one piece of advice for someone, going through, actually before that, another, just I guess thought of it, but one of the things you mentioned is, this thought of suicidal ideation, right? I think that's way more common than people give credit to, right? Like, they're in this point, and it's like, and when you have those thoughts, it's like, holy shit, where did that come from, right? And so it's those moments, exactly what you did. Like, you need to reach out to someone for help, because if that thought creeps up and then you continue to, like my brother did, right? If you continue to hold these things on and try to fight it internally, like, you're not going to win that battle. And the only way you win those battles is with, like you said, equipping yourself. So I wanted to touch on that because I think it's so very important that we make point of that. So my question to you now then is, if you were to give one tip to someone going through, right, they're in the shower, they're crying, right, those thoughts are creeping into their mind, what piece of advice would you give them?
Tell someone, right? Like, I think for me, again, I've done a lot of hard shit in my life, and the hardest thing I've ever done is tell someone how I was feeling. Um, it's not something that comes natural to me. I talk about it a lot with Amy, my best friend, whose husband was my brother's best friend and was killed. Amy's very open with her emotions. She shares how she's feeling very openly. She cries if you talk about Brendan, and people would say like, I'm not a crier. I'm very uncomfortable showing emotion. I'm very uncomfortable with people seeing that side of me. Um, and so, and I think that that's kind of typical within the military community, because like you said, like you're not supposed to show that side of yourself, right? You're not supposed to show your vulnerability. And I always envied Amy that she could be so open in front of people. Like if I feel like I'm about to cry, I have to like walk away because I'm like, oh my God, people can't see me cry, right? And so this idea of just saying I'm not okay, and listen, you hear it a lot, like you got to go out and tell people if you're not okay, you got to say something. And it's so simple, but it's so true. And it's also, for a lot of people, it's so hard. And I know that because it was so hard for me. It was so hard for me to tell my husband and my dad I wasn't okay, right? And so I think that's the first step that you have to take, because I don't know how long that I would have been able to sit in those thoughts by myself. And, I think about, guys like your brother that sat in those thoughts and how painful that was, and I think it's a stigma that we need to overcome in this country as a whole. To look at mental illness like any other illness that exists in society. You're not going to be afraid to say, I have cancer or I broke my leg. So why are you afraid to say, I have massive anxiety today, right? Because we've made it a taboo subject in our society, and we've got to take that away, and we have to make it like part of like our general nomenclature. Like, yeah, I'm not feeling right today. Like I'm not feeling like myself today. So I'm not going to be able to do that, but I think if we start to make it more mainstream to have these conversations, then I think some of these problems go away. I think that's the first step, honestly. It's just like talking about it and being open about it. And again, like I said, me sharing the side of myself is incredibly uncomfortable, but I know that it's really, really important. So
Yeah.
I do it nonetheless.
Yeah, I think to break the stigma, like people need to understand that it's like there's nothing wrong with you. Like just like if you break your arm, like sure, it could be like your fault, and like a lot of the times like your mental health could be your own fault, but like you have to go and you have to seek the help, and you have to stand up and say, to me, showing vulnerability is all about just showing up and taking that first step. And like you said, like for you, it's exercise and it's therapy. For other people, it's, psychedelics, it's cold plunging, whatever it might be, like whatever you have to do to help yourself and to not take your life, like let's do it, because, nothing is harder. Nothing is more challenging. So before we close, where can people find you, Ryan? Where can people reach out to they can reach out to you, relating to your stories and ask you questions? What are some plugs for Ryan Manion?
Yeah. I'm probably most active on Instagram, R Manion. I'm on Facebook because I'm older than you, and I
need to be.
Well, I saw your TikTok today, and I was like very impressed. I'm on TikTok. I've never posted a video. I'm on TikTok so I can watch my teenage daughters on TikTok, but like it's a great platform. As long as it's not really the Chinese spying on us, but outside of that, it's a good platform. I love some of the content. but I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And then you can also go to my website, ryanmanion.com as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And last question for you. What does the 38 challenge mean to you?
I mean, I think the 38 challenge is something that I relate to extremely. I have found that pushing myself physically has been extremely rewarding and important in my mental health journey. I mean, I'm still walking funny today because every Thanksgiving morning I go and do the Manion WOD with absolutely no training at a CrossFit gym by me, So, oh, sure, let me do, 250 squats before I, but this idea that, again, you push yourself out of your comfort zone, you make yourself uncomfortable. And, I've run 3 marathons now. And the first one I ran was in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
It was months after Travis died. And I couldn't, if you would have asked me, I mean, if you did ask me before that, when I was like, everybody was running this marathon for Travis, and I was like, all right, I can't wait to cheer you all on. And my dad was like, no, you're running it too. And it was like, there's no possible way I can do this. And I remember it was actually my uncle said to me, like, I was like, I can't do it. And he was like, well, how do you eat an elephant? And I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, one bite at a
One bite
time.
at a time. Yeah.
And so I downloaded Hal Higdon's Couch to Marathon training plan, and I followed it every day. And I didn't look ahead to the end of October, but I looked at what I had to do the next day. And I think, like, when we set these goals for ourselves, these physical challenges, like, they're incredibly important for us to level set. Like, you hear people all the time, like, I could never, every time I run a marathon, they're like, I don't know how you do it. I could never run a marathon. I'm like, if I can run a marathon, you can run a marathon.
Yeah.
Like, you don't really realize what you can do unless you go out there and try. And so I think, you pushing people to get out of their comfort zone and accomplish something physically that they didn't think they were able to do, that in itself has a ton of different components to help mentally. And I think it's an awesome thing that you're doing. And I think you honor your brother so well. I'm sure he would be really proud of what you do to continue his legacy, for sure.
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think when I look at, Travis Manion Foundation, I see a lot of the same things, right? Like, we are people who are driven by carrying on the legacies of our loved ones, and really the only way to help is to do hard things and to serve others through their legacies, right? I mean, it truly is. So I look forward to seeing how many more people Travis and Matt will be able to help together. I look forward to Army Navy and just a couple days from when this will be released. And I look forward to leaning on you as we continue to grow and help others.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan.